Originally, I'm from Exit 2 on the Turnpike, and if you've ever gotten off at that exit, there's really not that much to see, and it's flat. There aren't that many trees. When I was growing up, it was lots of farmland and a few strip malls, and now it's mostly strip malls and buildings and McMansions. And the town I grew up in didn't have sidewalks, and there was, except for the traffic outside, quiet, because no one was mostly out where I grew up. And so when I moved to the city, as exciting as the city is, my main feeling about being here was anxiety and a little bit of fear, mostly about the possibility of being taken advantage of and lost. And let me explain, Hudson County has changed significantly in the last 25 or more years. And one thing that really ratcheted up my anxiety was the only thing that I had that was worth something was my beat-up Ford Escort. And I would park my car, and any other car on the street, I'd say maybe every other car on the street, had a sign on the dashboard, and that sign said, those of you who've been here for a while know what the sign said, which is, the radio's already been stolen, don't bother breaking in. Or there'd be a sign that said, doors unlocked, don't smash the window to get in and steal my radio. And no one buys these, it seems, anymore. Those locks for your steering wheels, do you remember those? Everybody had one. So my feeling was, look, I need my car, because my car is my only way out of this not-for-nothing hellhole. So I want to be able to get out of here when I feel like it and go sit under a tree, you know? Not have the honking and the smell of warm urine in August. I just want to have an exit strategy. So I invested in parking my car in a locked area with a high fence. It wasn't a garage, and it wasn't as expensive as a garage, but let me just say, Rosemary and I had a few arguments about it, because the expense for me to park my piece of garbage car in this lot was about a third of what we were paying for rent, which meant if I ever did want to get out of town, like to go stay overnight someplace nice or have a meal anywhere, we didn't have the money to do it because I was protecting my car. And we'd have these conversations where she would say, you know, Lori, you're just going a little bit over the top. You have to relax. Statistically, it's unlikely that you're going to wind up having a problem like that. I know you see those signs, but your car is a piece of junk. I hate to tell you, your car isn't really that valuable, so I don't think that you have an issue. It's true, my car is not valuable. It's still not valuable. But what Rosemary didn't know about is that my car was nondescript and crummy enough that it was a perfect drug-mobile. And she was not thinking about that. She finally convinces me to let go of the lot and just start parking on the street like a normal person. The next week, my car was broken into. Then we had another conversation after we got the glass fixed. The glass fix cost about $100, and Rosemary said, all right, so that happened. I understand. Look, it's going to be fine. It happened already. You have nothing to worry about. Now you can let it go. She convinced me again. A week later, my car was stolen, and we found it about a month later in the tow yard, full of all kinds of creepy, it was disgusting. I don't know what they did in there, but and so I was crying, reaching under the seat for my cassette tapes because there were no CDs, right? And all my mixtapes this is the best friend mixtape, and I don't know if it's, just pulling, and my thermos and the book that I'd left in the back. And I left my car in the tow yard, and I think insurance gave us something like $400, so it wasn't even enough to buy another car. And I had this moment feeling so sorry for myself. I had a bag of my stuff from my vandalized, destroyed car on my shoulder, and I'm walking down the street, and I'm having this conversation. I don't think it's really with God. It's more like the city. It's like, okay, you've completely swallowed up my freedom, and now I'm stuck here forever. You might as well take my keys. And I took my car key, and I threw it in the gutter, and I stomped away. However, I was engaged in community outreach for my then church. And while I was feeling sorry for myself, I was really intensely enjoying my job. And one part of my job was running a youth group that I'd started with a lady from the synagogue. And we decided what we were going to do was we were going to have the most amazing Halloween party these children or anybody else in Hoboken had ever seen in their lives. And I was going to make this happen personally because I was going to drive to the Pine Barrens and I was going to get 100 pumpkins. And we were going to make jack-o'-lanterns, and the only decorations were going to be jack-o'-lanterns all over the church, and the lights turned down, and a dry ice machine to fill the whole thing with fog. And this is my master plan, and I had some buy-in. I had somebody to go buy the pumpkins with me, but when I was driving back up to Hudson County, I had this realization, I'm not going to be able to, even if two of us sit there and carve pumpkins, we're not going to be able to carve 100 pumpkins. You have to get it done in like 24 hours or else they're going to get gross. So I have to find a whole bunch of people to help me carve jack-o'-lanterns. So on the drive back, I'm thinking, who's around during the day to help us carve these jack-o'-lanterns? I pull up to the homeless shelter. And my friend and I unload all of these jack-o'-lanterns after convincing Sister Norberta that after lunch I should be allowed to invite everybody to engage in this project with me because they're going to want to do it. And by the way, they did. Everybody was in. I had about 50 guys in the dining room in the Hoboken shelter, and we're having a great time, and we're carving out the jack-o'-lanterns and laughing, and I'm just thrilled to be having so much fun, and these guys are having a good time. And then I realize I have to leave because I have to use the restroom, and I say, you guys, I'll be back in a minute, and I'm drinking my coffee, and I'm chuckling to myself, and I get to the doorway to go towards the restroom, and there is Sister Norberta, who compared to me is the size of a mountain at this point, and she's blocking the door, and she's smiling at me, and she says, you're not leaving that room until you collect every single paring knife that you handed out to the schizophrenic people, of which there are roughly 10. I want you to count the knives, and then you may leave. And so I'm thinking, yeah, I forgot these guys are schizophrenic. It didn't even occur to me when I was handing out the knives that maybe I should be worried about this because being homeless, they don't keep up with their meds that well. Another thought, why did Norberta let me come into this room with 50 knives and people who aren't necessarily on their medication? She never answered that question. I'm still asking it. But here's the point. The point of the story is obviously I'm fine, but the other point of the story is that when I was having a good time and hanging out with people, all of my dread and loathing and anxiety about things I actually probably should have been worried about disappeared because I was having too much fun to care about it anymore, right? Genesis. The story where we are this morning is right after the woman has had a conversation with the snake about the tree in the middle of the garden. God has told the woman that she cannot eat any fruit from that tree because if she eats it, she's going to die. And the snake is asking her questions about this conversation that she had with God. And the snake is positing ulterior motives for why God might have said what he said about the tree, which makes the snake, according to Walter Brueggemann, Old Testament scholar, the first theologian. Because he's thinking about the motivations of a God that would create a scenario where God has given the woman everything except this one tree. Why would God withhold this tree? And the snake says, well, probably the real reason that God doesn't want you to eat from that tree is because it will help you know good and evil. And as soon as you do that, you'll be just like God. And you'll have as much power as God. And God doesn't want you to be like God. And so the snake convinces the woman to eat. And the woman hands a piece of fruit to the man and he eats. And all of a sudden, they realize they're naked. And they hide in a shrub. And they're afraid. At this time, in biblical history, God apparently used to take walks at twilight when the evening breeze was at its most delicious, smelling the honeysuckle, looking for his friends along the path. Probably a brown bear came up with an inch between his shoulder blades that he couldn't get. God inches the bear, enjoying the beautiful world that God has made, but still looking for God's friends. And God then asks the first question that is posed in Scripture. And the question is to the people. And the question is this: where are you? There are rabbis that say that's the only question that the entire Bible is trying to ask. The question of, where are you? God calling us and asking us where we've gone. And out from behind the shrubs, the man yells, I was afraid. I figured out I was naked. It's her fault. And here is this split that happens in the story. Before chapter 3, the relationship that human beings have is one where they are fully engaged in a conversation and a life-giving relationship with God, and in a larger relationship with the creation, and also with each other. They're absorbed by the beauty of the world, their relationship with God, and with each other. As soon as this moment happens, when the man says, I was afraid because I'm ashamed, and points his finger at the woman and says, and it's all her fault, the focus of Scripture from the human's perspective is no longer we, meaning me and God, or me and the creation, or me and my partner. It's all I. I was scared. I was ashamed. I didn't do it. The focus becomes the person. And when the focus becomes the person for himself, all that's left is shame and anxiety and isolation from God. Loneliness. And it just keeps going after that. This self-absorption and this desire to have perfect freedom and perfect control and mastery over one's destiny and over the created order, says Genesis, is the way of death. And if you doubt that, pick up the paper. If you think about where we are culturally, where the greatest good that we as a people can imagine is being masters of our own destiny. We pull up our bootstraps and we don't need anybody. And if you ask, well, how much mastery do you need? It's infinite. We need more and more and more control. Well, how much do you need to acquire to feel like you have enough? There's no answer. We just need more and more and more and more. And the more and more and more mastery we have, and the more we accumulate, the more lonely and lost and anxious and paranoid we seem to get. How many nuclear warheads do we need? We still don't have enough. How much money, how much food, how much national security? We don't know because we haven't been there, but it's certainly not enough. Been thinking about how it might be a good idea for us to consider changing our national anthem to I Did It My Way. And I think Genesis has a point. We've been driving down this road, and it's leading us to a brick wall, and we're going at about 90 miles an hour, and all I see ahead is loneliness, anxiety, and a great big car crash. So maybe God was right about that tree, once it's eaten, creating death in the world. So here's the big question. What do you do? I think the gospel has part of the answer this morning. What's been going on in the first part of Mark is Jesus has been collecting his followers, and he's been causing a scene everywhere he goes. And the reason he's causing a scene is because where there are people who need to be healed, he heals them. Where there are people who have been excluded because they're unclean, he makes them whole. If they need forgiveness, he gives it to them. If they're hungry, he shares what he has. And I think that in our culture we call him a sucker. And because he's a sucker, people have been collecting around him like flies. He feeds everyone. He heals everyone. He forgives everybody. He hangs out with tax collectors. And he's gathered such a crowd that he's in his house and apparently trying to eat a meal with his friends, but everybody is so pushed in upon him, he can't even eat. You might think this is a problem and maybe he's getting cranky, but I'll tell you, from the perspective, let's say, of making those jack-o'-lanterns 20 years ago, I bet you he's just having such a good time, he hasn't even noticed that he's not able to eat because he's too busy talking and being with people and having fun, which is what community is. And his family come, and they're trying to shove in there to get him because he is creating such a scene and get him to come home. And we have that moment where somebody tells Jesus, your family wants you. And Jesus says this thing that really gets to me, which some of you know, when he says, who is my mother, who is my brother, who is my sister? Anybody who does the will of God. I don't like that answer as a parent at all. But at the same time, I think one of the things that Jesus is saying is that your family is anybody that you love, anybody that you share with, anybody that you forgive. And he has this mob of a family. This is another thing. When you hear about Christianity starting organizations that are called things like Family Focus, can I just say, look at this gospel and tell me about Jesus' focus on his nuclear family. It seems like Jesus' whole project is, and this I think is what he's inviting his followers to take on, is trying to figure out how to make family out of everybody that they meet. So here's the answer. to the isolation and the loneliness and the anxiety and the fear that got produced in the garden. That gets produced out of our desire to be completely free. What Jesus invites his followers to do is to give up their freedom and become slaves to one another. And to become part of one another. And whenever they see a stranger on the street, see their own brother, see their own sister, see their own mother. And get so engaged in healing and sharing and forgiving and getting embroiled in all kinds of ridiculous projects that are all done out of the sake of love, that they don't even remember themselves anymore. The I is completely consumed by the joy of the we. Grace Church is a project like that. If you want to figure out where to start, this is the place. Because this church and any church only exists as a place where you can go and recognize that stranger in the pew next to you as your sister or your brother. You start there. And any kind of thing that you engage in here, whether it was the market yesterday or coffee hour, or I don't know what else. There's so many wacky things going on at this church every Sunday. You name it, right? It's all done because you're working on expanding your family to the point where you're able to make anybody your brother or your sister or your mother. Jesus calls us to lay down our freedom willingly for the sake of love. Are we willing to follow him? Amen.
Amen.